Welcome back to Emma Mae's Possessions. If you've been following Emma Mae's journey, thank you for returning and continuing this story with me. Your presence here truly matters. And if this is your first time here, welcome. You're stepping into a layered, unfolding story about grief, silence, love, and the quiet ways our past shapes who we become. In the last chapter, we saw how Emma Mae's childhood loss taught her to survive in silence. Today, we shift slightly. We look at the man who noticed that silence, Samuel. Before he was her husband, before he carried the weight of providing for a family, he was a boy who learned early how to stand apart and how to perform belonging. This chapter explores what happens when two people shaped by absence recognize each other, and what silence feels like when life demands to be spoken. Let's begin. Samuel had grown up out of necessity. As the eldest of his siblings and the only one with a different father, he learned early how to stand apart without standing alone. His name didn't quite fit with the others. His place in the family came with unspoken explanations. And though he was loved, he was aware of the invisible line that separated him from his siblings. His mother had him at 13. The truth of his conception and his birth father lived in hushed tones, buried beneath whispers, details that were never openly discussed, existing only in whispers and neighborhood gossip. The word shame stayed with him, not because he believed it, but because it followed his mother like a shadow she never deserved. Samuel and his mother grew up together, two children learning life side by side. She was young, loving, fiercely protective, and determined to protect him for the weight of her misguided mistakes. Some days she led, other days she followed, and often they learned together. He learned responsibility early, learned how to help raise his siblings, learned how to make him useful, learned how to notice. His voice became his armor, his words, his humor, his singing each one away to claim space without asking permission. People leaned toward him when he spoke, forgave his differences when he sang. But Emma Mae hadn't been affected by any of it. She did not smile or flirt or even ask his name. She had simply listened. And when she spoke, her words were simplified, careful. That is what stayed with him, intrigued him. Her silence was not empty. It was deliberate, heavy with thought, familiar in a way he couldn't explain. It reminded him of the boy he once was before he learned how to perform belonging. So instead of filling the quiet, he was beside her, matched her pace, let the space between words breathe. Emma Mae didn't realize when his presence stopped feeling intrusive and began to feel steady. She didn't notice when she started answering him, one word at a time. She knew that in allowing him to accompany, she was doing something she had rarely done before. Never. Letting someone stay. Now, sitting in the stillness of her bathroom years later, she understood what she hadn't then. They hadn't found each other through grand gestures or certainty. They had recognized one another through absence, and somehow it had been enough. The sound of the front door opening jolted Emma Mae back to present day. She didn't need to look at the clock to know the time. Samuel's routine was as familiar to her as breathing. Work. A stop by the store. Ingredients for dinner tucked into brown paper bags. A small treat for Lorraine, something sweet, something that made her eyes light up. And flowers. Always flowers. Every single day without fail. She could already picture him before he stepped fully into view, the smile he would wear as he crossed the threshold, easy and warm, softening the fatigue of a long day. Beneath it, though, she knew she would see the fatigue. The faint heaviness in his eyes from spent working, providing, carrying the weight he never spoke aloud. Samuel would never admit he was tired. He stood firm in his belief that caring for his family was his responsibility alone. A duty he carried with pride, a role he never questioned, never set down. And suddenly, guilt bubbled up inside her chest, hot and uncompromising. This was not something she could fold neatly into her usual silence, not something she could swallow and survive quietly. The life growing inside her demanded acknowledgement, demanded truth. But would he see it as a blessing, or as another mouth to feed? The thought sent her spiraling. How could she have been so careless? How could she have let this happen without thinking it through? She chastised herself mercilessly, her thoughts sharp and unforgiving. She should have been more careful. She should have considered how hard Samuel already worked, how much he already gave, how much more would be asked of him now. One more child, one more responsibility, one more reason for him to push himself past exhaustion. Her hand drifted instinctively to her stomach, her breath growing shallow as panic crept in. She had always learned to endure quietly, to carry her fears alone, to make herself smaller so others would not have to bear her weight. But this time, silence felt impossible, and that terrified her more than anything else. Samuel stepped inside, nudging the door closed behind him with his foot, grocery bags rustling softly in his hands. "Hey," he said, voice warm despite the fatigue of the day. Emma Mae looked up from the counter a second too late, her smile slower than usual, careful, like something she had to assemble rather than feel. Samuel noticed immediately. Over the years, had learned her silences, their different shapes, their different meanings. This one was tight, guarded, the kind that pressed inward instead of drifting. High alert. Still, he said nothing. He set the bags down and bent to greet Lorraine, pulling a small paper sack from his coat pocket. Her face lit up instantly. "Daddy brought you something," he said, already smiling wider than he felt. Emma Mae exhaled, forcing a soft sigh that was meant to sound annoyed. "Samuel," she murmured, shaking her head, "you're going to spoil her before supper." He shrugged, pretending not to notice the strain beneath her tone. "Just a little something," he said easily. Flowers came next. He placed them on the counter like he always did, still wrapped in thin plastic, stems damp from the florist's cooler. Emma Mae picked them up, just as she did every day. "You didn't have to," she said, her voice gentle but distant. "I know," he replied. Their eyes met for half a second too long before she looked away. Not because the fear disappeared, not because the future suddenly felt simple, but because she wasn't standing in it alone. Sometimes love doesn't remove the weight, it simply helps you carry it. If this chapter resonated with you, if you've ever struggled to speak something heavy out loud, I'd truly love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who appreciates meaningful storytelling, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapter of Emma Mae's Possessions. Thank you for being here. Until the next chapter, breathe. You don't have to carry it alone.